everyone. I'm here today talking about the coronavirus, the COVID-19, and I have been communicating with the virus itself, and it was a very interesting experience, very unlike talking with animals. So I'm here to share what I've been able to determine from what I've learned from it. So it is going to take a little bit of a long-winded approach, perhaps, but I want to explain the backstory as well as what's actually going on with it at the moment. So the structure of our reality is that energy is always seeking to express itself. No matter what, any energy that goes out eventually will manifest itself as something, as long as it has a significant charge. So the way energy actually works with the collective consciousness, and there is a collective consciousness with just about everything. So we have a collective consciousness for our own species, for animal species. Trees have a collective consciousness, countries, continents, everything has a collective consciousness. So whenever we are experiencing anything that has some kind of a significant charge, our thoughts, our emotions, our actions are giving off an energetic charge at all times. So that charge will end up in the collective consciousness via the mass consciousness. So the consciousnesses work very much like weather patterns. And those weather patterns, if you think along the lines of rain, how we get rain, we literally, clouds fill the sky, rain falls down to the earth, sun comes out, heats up the earth, the moisture that's been dispersed there evaporates back up into the upper atmosphere in a gaseous state, cools down, water droplets form around a particle of dust, makes rain clouds, it rains again. There's literally a cycle that happens. And the way it works with energetic charge and frequency within consciousness, the collective consciousness, is very, very similar. So what I've learned over the course of time is that it can take anywhere between 15 to 25 years for an event that happens in a collective way on this planet that has significant charge to process through into the collective consciousness. And then for that energetic charge in the form of some kind of frequency to seek its own expression back onto the planet in some way, shape, or form. This is what's happening with the coronavirus right now. If you think back, and most of us were around for this, but if you think back approximately 20 years ago, there were a couple of events that had significant charge. So the first one that came to mind was Y2K. Y2K, we were turning into not only a new century, but a new millennium. There was a lot of people that were hoarding food then. They were terrified. Systems were going to go down. Everything was going to fail. There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of excitement about going into a new millennium. So I think that, was a little bit of a countered it a bit, but there was also a lot of fear. So it was also really the first time in history, recorded history, that we really came to understand just how dependent we were on technology. If all the systems went down, nobody'd be able to access anything. It was the first time in many ways that we started to have a real conscious understanding of our interdependence with technology as opposed to our interdependence with our family, neighbors, or even our community. So it was a real eye-opener for a lot of us just about how much things were literally changing. Uh, it wasn't the dependencies and their interaction within community. It was literally human interaction with a form of technology or machines. So the second event that just built upon that was, of course, 9/11, the tragedies that happened then. And even in those tragedies, the amount of emotional charge that came out of that event was tremendous. And again, even though it may have been human action that provoked all of that emotional charge, it was still activated through machinery. So again, we were getting another real eye opener about just how machines can be used to change human action, human history, human understanding of humanity. So, those two events that happened approximately 20 years ago, the charge from those two events went into, first of all, the mass consciousness, filtered throughout the planet, unified in its own way. Everybody got a dose of the charge that came off of those events. And then it made its way to the collective consciousness where it had a unification of sorts. The thing that happens in the collective consciousness is instead of one species or one country or one event creating a charge independently, the unification that happens in the collective consciousness is that it unifies all of the charges that came from all of the different mass consciousnesses. So as it digests and it flows and it unifies, at some point, when the consciousness on the planet is ripe again, that energy of the unification of that frequency will seek to express itself. So it just so happened that for whatever reason, the moment was right that this virus is literally becoming the expression of the events that actually happened approximately 20 years ago. So, one of the ways you can always understand exactly what's going on a more spiritual level or emotional level is by paying attention to what is known as core language. And it doesn't matter if you are paying attention to this in an individual, in your family members, your spouse, your partners, whoever it might be, or if you are literally listening to political broadcasts for that are representing countries, institutions, whatever it might be. Their core language is always going to tell you exactly what anything is really about. So the catchphrases, shall we call them that are really, really standing out with the COVID-19 outbreak are social distancing and self-isolation. So if you think about those catchphrases and what they actually mean, and tie them back into the experiences we had about 20 years ago, I think it's pretty easy to see how the experience we had 20 years ago is now literally expressing itself in a physical manifestation of self isolation and social distancing. Even though social distancing may not be the actual most appropriate words to use, it's more of a physical distancing. But I think the anxiety that was created 20 years ago is now literally manifesting itself in the form of a virus. 20 years ago, it started a condition, and that's what I really do have to call it. It's a condition within the human psyche, within the human experience of we're just not safe. We're just simply not safe. So to be safer, we have to withdraw. And to withdraw, it means that we have to isolate a little bit more, even if we're isolating within a crowd. So instead of opening ourselves freely to be available to others that may want to communicate or somehow interact with us, we may still interact with that person, but we will do so through an energy field that is built strong like a wall. We're no longer so much more open. Now, in the last 20 years, which is approximately a generation, everybody that has been born since these events 20 years ago has literally been born imprinted with this belief system that they're not safe. It is part of the mass consciousness, part of the collective consciousness. So when you are born, you are literally born with the imprinting of whatever the collective consciousness is. So that being said, we as a species are an interactive species. We clan, we need family, we need interaction, we need, human comfort, we need to get together with people. But even as we are doing that, especially within the last 20 years, there's still this conflict within us of feeling unsafe. So the thing that we crave most, which is that human interaction, human bonding, human coming togetherness, it's creating this feeling of, are we safe? Or will we be safe? Is this the right decision? It's conflict. And whenever there's conflict, something has the opportunity to arise out of it. And it's something that sometimes we perceive as negative, but it's not necessarily true. Whatever arises out of conflict arises to bring our attention to it. So COVID-19 is literally what's happening. We all, on some level, are feeling this restraint and restriction and this inability to feel safe, even though we crave what we crave within human interaction. So it's one of the things that's happening is, since it's targeting the elderly and it's targeting the young more so than all of the rest of us in between. One of the reasons for that is because the frequency matches. So think of it along this line. So try for a moment to just back out of the thought of COVID-19 as a virus and think of it as a frequency, because that's really and truly what it is. It's just a frequency. So whoever has that matching frequency within themselves, they're more likely to manifest this frequency as a virus in some way, shape, or form, in some level of severity. The younger people are much more volatile and could easily be much more victimized by the COVID-19 frequency, simply because they're actually born with it imprinted into them. That frequency of feeling unsafe, the desire for connection and communication and interaction, but literally coming conflicted. The elderly, that is partially because, first of all, in a lot of cases, their bodies simply are not as functioning as well as health should bring. Um, and the other thing has to do with, the older you are, the more you've seen. And there's a lot of elderly people out there that have lived through a lot more conflict and understand the frequency of conflict and the frequency of this COVID-19. So when you're young, the misfortune of being young is that, um, having been born literally imprinted with this conflict between interaction and being safe, you haven't had enough life or enough living yet to really make a decision on whether that is true for you, and where you want to file that, where you want to put it. So that is one of the major reasons that the COVID-19 targets the young, because that frequency is still very active within them and in their energy field, because they haven't made decisions about keeping it active or deactivating it. So when you think about how the COVID-19 is manifesting itself, what action does it actually create? Since it's being said that it is new to us as a human species, and we really haven't developed an immunity to it yet, if you get COVID-19, what happens? Well, I guess that depends on to the level of severity. But the very first thing it does is it brings you, on some level, interaction. It brings you a community, albeit that community might not be the one you're actually focused on or the one you actually desire, but it does bring you community. It gets attention very, very quickly. For anybody that gets it, if they get it, unfortunately, to any level of severity, they are going to be either hospitalized or under care in some way, shape, or form. But odds are they're also going to be isolated. So this COVID-19 is literally manifesting the experience that we are having internally of a need for interaction, a need for community, a need for um, our species to come together, but with the conflict of feeling unsafe. So yes, you are getting the attention. Yes, you're getting the care, but you're also, odds are, being isolated, which is the perfect manifestation of how we have integrated the fears from 20 years ago. How do we deal with all of this? Well, that's a little more complicated. I really highly recommend following the instructions that are kind of laid out for us, self-isolation, be very careful, be very cautious, because the truth of the matter is depending on how you actually experience these, the need for connection, but also the fear of isolation within you, what those things mean to you, that is what is going to make you more or less vulnerable to this COVID-19 strain of virus. But I would really encourage you to really try to reach out and create community in whatever way you can, because that is what you're actually craving. The story goes that the COVID-19 came from some version of interaction between the exotic animal trade and human beings. They're claiming that this strain of virus has existed within animals for a long time, but just never interacted with humans. Well, my first question to that was, well, why? If humans have been interacting with these animals for a very long time, why now? Well, the truth of the matter is now is because it's the point in human evolution and human consciousness that we are prepared to start understanding how we have this conflict literally ingrained with us around the fear of interacting with humans versus feeling unsafe through interacting with humans. It is a major conflict. So we have to start making a decision and taking some kind of action towards unity. That's really what it comes down to. And if there's one thing that this virus is doing, it's creating a form of unity. It might not be the ideal unity where you would want to think that we'd all just come together and be happy, happy, but it is unifying the world. So take advantage of that. Reach out to people. Start talking to them, if you can, about how this conflict is affecting you, how you want to be closer to people, how you want to be more involved, how you would like them to be more involved with you, how you really want to be able to share in a very open way who you are, but you also want to be able to feel safe in doing so. Because this is what this conflict actually is. None of us actually feel safe in being vulnerable anymore. And that vulnerability is what is preventing us from really interacting with the rest of our own species. It's why so many of us, the business, the animal business has grown so much in the last 20 years because people feel safe in whether it be confiding or interacting or confessing or whatever it might be with animals. But we just simply do not feel so safe anymore in talking to another of our series as our own species. Whether it's we fear judgment or we fear that there's somehow some way, shape, or form out to get us, we're just afraid that if we say something wrong or we leave ourselves open that they are going to use it to their own advantage and not to ours. All of it is the same thing. It's that we really, really want craving and bonding and connecting And we want that hug from that other person, but we're terrified of having it because we feel like it's going to compromise us somehow. So this COVID-19 is literally a physical manifestation of those fears. It's causing us to self-isolate, to social distancing, but the social distancing really isn't it. It's more of physical distancing. But this all ties in with how we have allowed ourselves to fall into a bit of a trap of literally relying on technology for our interaction with the human species. We just simply do not get together anymore the same way that we do. How many of us truly know the person we work next to or our next door neighbors? How many of us really are involved or interactive in community anymore? Maybe online communities, but physically speaking, not near the way it was 40 years ago, maybe not even 50 years ago. I'm sure there are some communities out there that are still very, very interactive with one another, but the majority is just not so much anymore. And the truth is, we just simply don't trust our fellow human being anymore, for the most part. So, this is the opportunity. It is literally the fear and anger and terror and horror that we experienced 20 years ago is literally raining back into our reality now as a virus. And we perceive it as being a very physical reason to be afraid. But all we're doing by being afraid is we are actually re imprinting ourselves. We are justifying the reasons why we cannot interact physically with another human being and why we shouldn't do that. So, for right now, Uh, yes, follow the rules, follow the regulations, be safe, take care of yourself, but do definitely do some internal digging. Very, very important. Do some internal digging right now around what your conflict really is between wanting human interaction and being afraid of getting it. What are your fears are going to happen if you do open yourself up to be vulnerable to the person you want to be most vulnerable with? There's a lot of questions around that. And core language, again, will play a very big factor in you talking with your inner parts, the inner pieces of yourself. There's going to be very terrified parts of yourself, and yet there's going to be parts of yourself that are totally needing some kind of human contact. COVID-19 will pass. Everything always does. The key, the key with COVID-19 is to not generate such an emotional and mental output that we start this cycle all over again so that in another 20 years we're dealing with some other kind of pandemic, and it might not even be a virus. It could be something much worse. So I would really, really encourage you to keep smiling, keep laughing. It raises your frequency. It makes you much more untouchable. Remember, the COVID-19 virus is not a high frequency virus, it's a low frequency virus because it's based out of fear and terror and conflict. It's based in the belief of the worst of our human species. So, really and truly, do what you can to laugh, watch funny movies, um, play with your pets, play with your children, whatever will get you engaging in laughter and humor. We may all be feeling a little restricted right now. We may all be feeling a little confined. We may be, in fact, afraid. But that's okay. It's okay to feel what we feel. Just don't get stuck in that feeling. Allow yourself to process through it. Allow yourself to genuinely have compassion for whatever it is you're feeling. Give yourself permission to feel it. Just say, give yourself a time limit. I've always had a, rule of thumb with myself that whenever I go into a pity party, that's great, fine, and wonderful. I'm really okay with that, but I put a 24-hour limit on it. I don't allow myself to stay stuck in it. We're human beings. Part of what we're actually missing in this world, in this life, is the fact that we really, really do not always give ourselves permission to feel what we feel. Our inner critic kicks in and tells us we shouldn't be doing this, that, or the next thing. Well, we need to do some work with that as well. So I really, again, encourage you to feel what you're feeling, just don't get stuck in it. And I know this will pass. And the only way to really ensure that once this passes and things start to get back to normal is that we need to start opening up in small steps, in small, safe steps, to the rest of our own species. It's no one's fault that COVID-19 exists. It's everyone's fault that COVID-19 exists. We all feed into the mass consciousness, which feeds into the collective. So we can use that to our advantage, knowing that we all feed into it. We just simply have to start feeding into it in a way that will bring us a better reality as opposed to the one that we've been currently living. So even though you might not be able to walk out your door and go give your neighbor a hug, you can sit here, you can think about your neighbor, and you can give them an energetic hug. Love this virus. Send love to the virus. Send love to the people that are experiencing this virus in a much more severe way than yourself, because they're the ones that are feeling the conflict even more than you are. We can stop the virus. It may take some time, but we have to access the best of ourselves to stop what's manifested from the worst of ourselves. And we can all do this because we're all really great, great beings. We're all really great people. We may have some bad habits. We make bad decisions. I know I've made my share, but we're all really true bright lights. So if you do have any questions or comments, feel free to contact me, of course. I'm going to post this, and then I do think I will, at a later date, perhaps do a live stream or an interactive Zoom meeting um, so that you can ask questions, and if I can answer them, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But until then, be safe, do what you have to do to take care of you, but remember that being happy, feeling happy, and slowly but surely starting to take measures that will allow you to connect on a physical level and a social level to be able to interact with our own species in a safe manner is what will do the greatest good to counteract what's happening with this virus. So until then, take care, be well, and smile.